DW Africa Link.
Money flows in, but does progress follow? Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, still relies heavily on foreign aid. But at what cost? Decades of international assistance have done little to solve systemic challenges, and some argue that aid fuels corruption, stifles innovation, and keeps the country trapped in dependency. What would it take for Nigeria to break free and build a self-sustaining future? Let's dive into the real impact of foreign aid and why it might be time for Nigeria to chart its own course. Stay tuned. My name is Josey Mahachi. Welcome to Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter from Africa.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
Nigeria's development has long relied on foreign aid, creating a cycle of dependency that hinders sustainable progress. Over the past decade, the US has provided $7.8 billion in aid, funding sectors like healthcare, security, education, and economic development. But with the Trump administration cutting support to developing nations, Nigeria faces an urgent need to fill the gap. With its vast resources, should Nigeria still depend on foreign assistance to sustain its 200 plus million people? Well, to discuss further on this, I'm joined by Nancy Illoh Nnaji. She's the CEO of the African Economic Congress, as well as our DW correspondent in Abuja, Ben Adam Shemang. Nancy, the Chief Executive Officer of African Economic Congress. I just want to start with you on a general comment. What is your reaction on the appeal the Director General of World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, that African leaders should stop depending on foreign aid as a way of the problems confronting the continent?
Thank you very much. I think what Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's appeal is both timely and necessary. Africa cannot continue to beg for aid. Africa cannot build a sustainable future if it remains dependent on external assistance. While foreign aid has historically played a role in development in Africa, it also comes with, we know, conditions that do not sometimes align with Africa's long-term interests. We have seen examples in different African countries. Instead, African leaders must prioritize domestic resource mobilization. The leaders must improve governance. They have to tackle corruption and implement policies that enhance trade and industrialization in Africa. So the future of Africa's economic development lies in strategic investments like intra-African trade, for example, especially through the African Continental Free Trade Area, and fostering an enabling environment for local and foreign investors. So what Dr. Iweala said is both timely and necessary, and many of us know on the continent. So she's not saying anything that is different or absurd.
Right. But then also her as the Director General, she's Nigerian, you're Nigeria. We're talking of a country that's got the biggest economy right now. I mean, this is the biggest country in Africa. And to talk about this now in 2025, I do agree with what you're saying, that we've known this for long. We didn't need to wait for Trump or Elon Musk to come and say,
we didn't need him to do that.
We didn't need him to do that. So where do you think Africa is going wrong? Why the delay? Why now?
I think our governance needs to be improved on. And I think number one should actually be corruption. Because Africa is a continent that has the largest youth population in the world. Over the weekend, I was watching the German election and analysis, talking about even the demography in Europe. You're seeing that the median age in Europe, or let me say in Italy, is close to 50 years. The median age in Europe is about 40 plus. But the median age in Nigeria, for example, is 18 years old. The median age in Africa is less than 20. So like in Nigeria, 65% of our population is between 0 and 13 years. So what are we talking about? Have we been able to harness that population itself, the output from that population, then how do we also mobilize our domestic resources? For Africa as a continent, we have oil, we have gas, we have lithium. If we're saying, okay, let's go electric vehicles now, everything to build electric vehicles in Africa. If it's not 100%, it's about 90%. So what are we talking about? So I think African leaders just need to sit tight. It's not for Dr. Okonjo-Iweala to speak about it or for President Trump, America First policy, to not just in the right direction. We need to tackle corruption. We need to implement policies that would deliberately enhance industrialization of Africa and of course, look at demography of Africa, which is the young population.
Right. And you mentioned something actually that I've really always say that it's funny how Africa, we export, right, a lot of our resources to Europe, to America, and then they produce things and then bring them back to sell to us.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And then they bring them back to sell to us in Africa. And that really leaves me with this question for you, Nancy, before I go to our correspondent, Ben. Why is Nigeria still so reliant on US funding?
I wish I can have a full answer, but let me try. Let me try to compartmentalize it without also not demonizing foreign aid. Because I must also say that foreign aid can also be useful in emergency situations, but countries should not depend on foreign aid. Emergency situation like humanitarian crisis, like the pandemics, health pandemics, and even post-conflict reconstruction, but not a long-term economic strategy. So it's not sustainable. And like I mentioned, Nigeria has abundant human and natural resources. What we lack is effective policy implementation, strong institutions, and accountability. So if aid is mismanaged or is used to fill the budget gaps, like we've seen with not grants, though sometimes some come as grant, let's say from the World Bank, while we see aid coming into filling our budget or loans coming into filling budget gaps, we should drive structural reforms that will create dependency. For example, in Nigeria, we're now talking about tax reforms. Our tax reforms has taken so long a time to be able to come up to what everyone will accept. Now is before our parliament. We hope that when that happens, it will really be a tax system that really reflects the people and what the people want. What are we doing in terms of investment in our oil and gas infrastructure? So instead of relying on aid, Nigeria should focus on strengthening our economic fundamentals, boosting revenue through taxes, getting more people into the tax net, not even necessarily even raising taxes, investing in infrastructure. Nigeria has an infrastructure deficit of about $30 trillion, wow. I think, in the next 30 years. So we're talking about $1 trillion every year. How are we going to get it? Of course, it's not going to be foreign aid. It's about, unlocking the areas of opportunity in Nigeria and, of course, Africa, diversifying our economy away from primary resource, whether it's oil in Nigeria, whether it's diamond in Botswana, whether it's cocoa and gold in Ghana and in Cote d'Ivoire. Whatever it is, can we diversify our economy from the primary resource?
Right. Now, just to take you to the people, Ben, you're our eyes and ears on the ground. Just to find out from you, how did Nigerians react after that statement by the DG of WTO to say we should stop relying on foreign aid?
Yes, truly Nigerians are feeling that time has come that Nigerians via the government should look inwards. I still remember former President Buhari lamenting that even toothpick is being imported. There's this craze for foreign items. And that is why if you look at the way globally, Nigeria is a kind of so dependent. Now, if you want to enjoy so much aid from America, for example, there is this AGOA, they call it African Growth and Opportunity Act. If you play to the American games, of course, you're bound to get some aid from America. Then you have the one from Europe, the European Partnership Agreement, even for Africa, ACP, and all that stuff. In other words, if you're able to play to what some of these colonial masters, even via neo-colonialist kind of a setup, of course, you're bound to get assistance. Nigerians are not just happy with many of these things. And when you look at it, Josey, having seen this, China decided to also come in They are even building what they call ECOWAS Parliament for entire West African region. They call it the Eye of West Africa. And Russia also decided, okay, there has to be that persistent engagement with Nigeria, just like India is also saying persistent engagement with Nigeria. So the whole gamut of things is this dependency. There has to be it. Nigerians are not too happy that it's happening, but they are also happy that the knock is coming from a Nigerian, Dr. Ngozi Iweala.
Right. But also just to find out, we are talking about foreign aid here, right? And we have in Africa a lot of non-governmental organizations that even have offices in every part of Africa. But what have been the activity types of sectors, NGOs or donor nations engaging in Nigeria?
In most cases, they target education. Then they target the health care in particular. In terms of education, UNICEF, which is also part of these aid-giving agencies, they say that Nigeria has about 18 point how many million people out of school children in Nigeria. That's a huge population. If you add that of Niger or add that of Benin, Togo, you see that out of school syndrome alone is more than their population. So the agencies are feeling that this is an area they can come in because there are funding gaps. Then when you come to health, for example, in terms of the fight against HIV, AIDS, and some other diseases, these are areas they come in. Then with the coming of Boko Haram, insecurity just came in, and you could see many of these non-governmental agencies flooding into Maiduguri. And at the point, some of the government agencies here in Nigeria are also asking, look, what really are they doing? When you go and pay in hotel rooms, you're paying for close to 2 years, or you go hire some buildings for 3 years, and making cost of living so high there. And that's why people are saying and questioning some of their activities, especially some security agencies. At the point they were even saying you can pack and leave the agency because they come in with some aids. Some of these materials also disappear in the name of saying that those fighting the government, Boko Haram too, they do have some rights to life. And that's why it must also reach them a kind of.
Right. And Nancy, I don't know if you want to add something on what Ben has already said, but does Nigeria have the capacity to carry on with the development of the nation without this foreign assistance?
I think what Mr. Shemang said, Ben, he's right, and if you see how the aid comes in, it's whether health, it's humanitarian assistance and all of that. But can Nigeria really lead Africa if we call the bluff? Nigeria has the potential to set an example. And if we're putting the figures, I think from USAID, if I'm not mistaken, we got, I think, about $1.02 billion from the agency last year. And what Nigeria did, immediately President Trump announced that decision, was that it created a committee immediately, to be able to put measures together to be able to, ensure that perhaps patients receiving treatment for HIV, tuberculosis, for instance, in Nigeria, our Federal Executive Council approved $3.2 million to procure 150,000 HIV treatment packs over the next 4 months. And the same Federal Executive Council approved $1 billion for health care sector reforms, because where the aid also comes in, especially in Nigeria, it's around health. So does Nigeria have the potential? We do, by reducing our dependence on foreign aid and focusing on self-reliance. But I know that it has to be a gradual process. It's not just going to be, take the oxygen away from the patient and the patient dies. So it's not an abrupt rejection of all forms of external support, because strategic partnerships like FDIs and trade agreements should be encouraged over the traditional aid. And I'm not just talking about Nigeria itself. I'm talking about the remaining countries on the African continent, because we share almost the same DNA in terms of going to beg. And, so they look at us as a child that needs the feeding bottle always. But Nigeria can lead by implementing policies that attract investment, improving governance, and demonstrating that African countries can fund their own development through efficient resource management and innovation. We're in the fourth industrial revolution now. Nothing stops us from Africa being the continent of the decade or decades to come, because we have everything to make it work. We have the young population for labor. We have the resources, primary resources that can be processed into secondary and exported there. We have a strong African diaspora that also have their own monies. They have their expertise to also latch on, like India is doing now. We also need to strengthen the inter-African trade, leveraging on AFTA, like I mentioned, and fostering regional economic cooperation. We should be able to trade with ourselves. We should be able to work around each other or amongst one another as Africans, just like you see in the Eurozone. So I think that Nigeria can help shift the continent away from aid dependency.
Right. You are talking of Nigeria leading, right, other African countries to outrightly call the bluff and reject foreign assistance. But as we are discussing now, honestly, do you think Nigeria can take that lead?
That's why I actually said it's a gradual process. It's not something, because all of us in Africa, the countries are trying to find their feet. There's one form of support year in, year out to different African countries from the foreign countries. Either is in budget support, either is healthcare support, either is one thing or the other. If they are not taking IMF loan one way or the other, like Ghana had to go to IMF to, for a $3 billion loan. The country, Egypt, so it may not be immediate, but can we have a consensus? Can the elites come together in Africa and say, we need to move Africa forward? Does Africa have what it takes? Africa is the beautiful bride. Africa is a beautiful bride, but it hasn't realized that it's the beautiful bride. The leaders perhaps may realize it by just, at conferences, they say all the nice things, but are we implementing what we're supposed to implement? So until we begin to do that and see pockets of that in Nigeria, for example, in Ghana, in Rwanda, in Egypt, in South Africa, for example, then we know that we are serious for it. But for now, let's wait and see.
All right. To just come to you, Ben, I know that when the announcement came soon after President Donald Trump was inaugurated that, I'm cutting off aid, especially U.S. aid. U.S. aid affects a lot, especially when it comes to health. How's been the situation in Nigeria? We're talking of issues to do with family planning, issues to do with women, children, treatment and all. Has Nigeria started feeling the pinch already?
Well, let me put it this way, that Nigeria is one big elephant with a big stomach, so that sometimes some pains will be there, but some Nigerians will simply take it as if, it is the usual thing, and that's why there's the worry that due to corruption, some of these countries that also give aid or assistance, they realize that there's what is supposed to be counterpart funding. Counterpart funding is if America or Europe is saying that they're going to give you this or that amount to fund education, to fund HIV or tuberculosis fight, then the government should be able to bring its own part of the bargain so that they have it in full, 50-50 to start the project. But Europe or America will realize they will send this money, but the Nigerian part is not paying its own part of the bargain. And so this is a big problem to Nigeria, and that's why at the point they stop giving money, they'll say, okay, why don't we go into assisting in terms of infrastructure? If you say you want medical, whatever, they begin to supply. But this withdrawal, because government is feeling that they have to take action because this is politics, they've made the announcement. But you see, Josey, it's one thing to make an announcement in government, it's another one for the money to flow. And when money begins to flow, what is the hand of corruption in all of this? You see contract inflations and even what they call fake medications here and there. And that's why you have some agencies still catching and holding on to people importing fake drugs into the country. Yes, there is the effect the moment you see that America is stopping. And that's why government feels they should act immediately. But acting immediately is once you see the result.
Okay. Now, Nancy, as we wrap up our discussion, if Nigeria were to shift away from aid dependency, what concrete steps should policymakers in the private sector take to build a self-sustaining economy?
I think the private sector should be a partner with the government. And the private sector, number one, goes to where profit is. So it's for the public sector now, the government to be able to align its policies, explain to private sector. In fact, you don't even need to explain. When the private sector sees that you have an enabling environment, you have bankable projects, you have a government that is transparent, an accountable government that will be also transparent with the contract. If it says A is A, and not in the night, A becomes B, and their investments go to the ruin. So private sector, generally, even in Nigeria, private sector will see opportunities and they just lash on with the government and they do the right thing. So for me, I just think that the challenges that the government must confront when it comes to developing the country in collaboration with the private sector is, for example, corruption and governance issues. Number two, security. I must talk about it. The issue of banditry, kidnappings have disrupted activities in the country that also deter private sector investment. Poor infrastructure, be it power, be it road networks, be it even the logistics systems, all have increased the cost of doing business in the country. I mentioned earlier on over-dependence on oil. We welcome the things that are happening right now in the oil space. Then limited access to finance, because I must also say, it's, for example, in Nigeria, small businesses create more jobs. Small businesses in Nigeria create about 96% of jobs and 84% of employment. Yet these SMEs do have limited access to finance. So these are the key challenges that the public sector must confront for the private sector to be able to be a partner for this development.
Right. Now, Ben, as we also wrap up our discussion, your last point from your experience covering Nigeria, I mean, beyond Western aid, the country is also growing economic ties with countries like China. Do you see this as a sustainable alternative as infrastructure development is happening in Nigeria, or it is just another form of dependency?
Well, it is another form of dependency, but the argument many Nigerians are always making here is that China did not colonize any country, and therefore they are coming to Nigeria is not suspect. And if you check in terms of some people ready to invest in what they call hostile environment, it's only the Chinese you find them doing. In terms of the railway network, they crisscross along areas where you have banditry, but you still find the Chinese doing their jobs along the rail lines. And you could see in terms of airport remodernization, like the Nnamdi Azikiwe airport here in Abuja, that was done by the Chinese. But you find out that many of these European countries, they just come sign agreements, or they just come to explore and just say they will come and invest, but you don't just see them. It's like they come for sightseeing. And that's why some people are saying, okay, let's go on with the Chinese for the technology for the time being, even though criticisms are that the Chinese technology is like a weekend. Just when you want to enjoy it, it will end. In other words, they are not long-lasting, so to speak. But all the same, the Chinese are coming on board very well.
I agree with you, Ben.
Well, on that very note, we wrap up our discussion with Nancy Illoh Nnaji, Chief Executive Officer, African Economic Congress, as well as our DW correspondent in Abuja, Nigeria, Ben Adam Shemang. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just to bring you up to speed, according to Development Aid Report, in 2024 alone, the United States provided approximately $6.6 billion in humanitarian assistance to sub-Saharan Africa. Additionally, in December 2024, remember President Joe Biden also pledged $1 billion to address food insecurity and support internally displaced persons and refugees across 31 sub-Saharan African countries. So, what happens next? Food for thought. That's it for this edition of Africa Link. Remember, you are not just a listener, but a part of our community, and your engagement can shape the direction of our discussions. We value your insights and encourage you to share your thoughts with us always. Please remember to follow so you can catch all of the Africa Link podcast episodes. This podcast was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabi. My name is Josey Mahachi. Thanks for listening. Until the next one, it's bye for now.
DW. Made for minds.